So this is actually not going to be a presentation on expectations at all. I've changed my mind. We're going to talk about Manchester United in the English Premier League 1992 to 2023, an epic swashbuckling tale of attacking soccer and a maniacal Scottish manager. I bet none of you were expecting that, were you? So, what do we do with expectations? What does it do when expectations aren't met? That's what we're going to talk about today. But previously on your mind at work, the quirky half at least, and I'll let you guess which half that is, we talked about labeling. When you take a situation and put a label on your emotions to help you manage your emotions. We also talked about reappraisal. When you change your interpretation of an event to help manage your emotions. And today we're going to talk about expectations, the awareness and understanding of what these can do for you. These two sessions, last month and this month, actually are all about staying calm under pressure, managing your emotions. And at the heart of this is something we talked about way back in October, mindfulness. When you are mindful, you are able to label, you are able to reappraise, and you are able to be aware and understand the expectations and what expectations can do to you. And that is what we're going to talk about today. There's plenty of time for discussion and questions at the end, but there is a fair bit to get through as well. So without any further ado, do you remember these from our previous sessions? Because this is also at the heart of what we're going to talk about today. So there are two responses that the brain will make to any given situation. It will either be kick into survival mode, which we're calling a toward response, or it will kick into the life-threatening mode, which is the away response. The away response is always centered around primary threats. So seeing a bear in the woods, getting hot, hungry, or thirsty, or seeing even angry faces in a photograph, in the brain promotes, provokes an away response. A toward response is when you anticipate a reward, like eating food, earning money, handling money, sex, a smiling face. It doesn't matter. When you anticipate something that you associate pleasure with or happiness, that's a towards response. And these are at the center of what we're talking about. So I'll be talking about expectations in the mind today, and then next Wednesday, Jane will be talking about motivation at work, bringing some of the ideas from today into the practical sense. So expectation is the root of all heartache, said Shakespeare. Man, didn't he know what he was talking about? It's really interesting to me. We talk all the time at work, we've got to manage our clients' expectations, or we've got to manage so-and-so's expectations because maybe we're not going to be able to give a pay rise this month, or maybe we're not going to be able to promote that person for another little while. So all the time you talk about managing expectations, but do you truly understand what managing those expectations is doing to the other person? I think I didn't before I did the research for this. And I find it very interesting now because it's changed my approach to the way that I communicate certain things to my upward management, my peers, and those that are my direct reports. So here's what we're going to do today. I have a little scenario for you, as I sometimes do. Then we're going to talk about what to expect from expectations, and then how experiencing what you expect as a surprising result. Then we're going to talk about the placebo effect. Then we're going to talk about how we underpromise to manage the expectation of a reward, and how we can create the right expectations. Then we'll replay scenario 1 and call it scenario 2, because in scenario 1, things as normal go horribly wrong. And then we'll have an expectation summary, and then hopefully there's lots of time for a discussion at the end. So today, I want to introduce you to Paul. Paul is a very successful businessman. He runs his own business. He effectively manages IT software development projects, and he has a chain, if you like, or a group of very senior software developers or contractors who work for him and he manages the IT projects with their help for clients that he goes out and finds. But he's a very successful businessman. Now, he's just had a meeting with a brand new client and is very, very, very excited. He's got a new project that he's going to quote, and he's really anticipating that this project, even though he's got to quote it in 2 days, the profit on this project is going to be way, way higher than anything he's ever been able to achieve before. So he's feeling all warm and fuzzy and really wants to sit down, get this quote done and see how much he's actually going to make. Now, by a sheer coincidence, and it really is, Paul is married to Rose, who we've met in previous scenarios. And Paul is so excited that he goes home and he says to Rose, "You're never going to believe this. I've only got 2 days to do this, but I've got to do a proposal for this project, which is going to generate so much profit. We're going to think we've died and gone to heaven. We're going to go for 3 weeks to the Caribbean on the back of this project alone. That's how absolutely amazing we're going to generate the profit from this particular project." Rose says, "That's awesome. That's really awesome." So good old Paul goes into his study, fires up the spreadsheet and starts to do the work. And he says to himself, "You know what? This project is such a gold mine. I'm going to charge the maximum fee I possibly can. And I'm going to get all of my contractors on this project to make sure that we can deliver it and that we can get that quote out and do it as soon as possible because I want that profit." Unfortunately, what then happens is Paul starts to crunch the numbers and suddenly finds, completely unexpectedly, being the key words, he's not making a profit. When he got to the bottom of the spreadsheet, he was actually making a loss. He said, "How can this be? How can this be?" He went back and reworked the numbers and he was still making a loss. Now, Paul is starting to get a little bit agitated because his expectation was, this is a gimme. This is going to be so easy. I'm going to make a fortune out of this particular project. He's so frustrated, you might notice even his hair's changed color and steam is coming out of his ears. He can't believe what's happening, but he does understand that there's some tough decisions ahead. What might those tough decisions be? Well, if he can't make the right number appear at the bottom of the spreadsheet, he might have to let this project go. And then he's not just letting himself down, but he's letting Rose down. And he's also letting his contractors down because he's already spoken to them and said, there's this whiz-bang project on the horizon. It's going to make money for all of us. So the only option he's got at that point is to go and find a cheaper alternative than his usual contractors. But he's already set the expectation with his usual contractors that there's going to be a lot of work for them and lots of money for them too. How does he get out of this? He has reached an impasse and he's feeling really frustrated. He doesn't know what to do. So on the spur of the moment, always a bad thing to do, by the way, on the spur of the moment, he sends an email to all his usual contractors and says, the project's off, we can't do it. What do you think the reaction of his contractors are? Well, they're disappointed, but they're more than disappointed. He promised them, he set the expectation that they were all going to be swimming in money because of this lovely, lovely project that was going to generate all this profit. So immediately his contractors, his usual contractors at least, fire back at him. You must have gone in too expensive. How is this possible that we can't do this project? You told us it was a gimme. What's going on? What's going on? And so in the space of just under an hour, Paul manages to go from enthusiasm and joy to depression and broken relationships with his usual and up till now loyal contractors. It didn't need to be this way. Paul needs to manage his expectations and those of others to stay cool under pressure, and that's where he slipped up. In particular, it's the expectation of the positive rewards in his mind, what he communicated to good old Rose, and also to his contractors that is now coming back and biting him in a big way. So what can we do about that? It's all to do with the primary rewards and the primary threats, the towards responses and the away responses, because the expectations were set so high There were towards responses that became away responses when reality started to kick in. So here's what you can expect from expectations. When we talk about labeling and when we talk about reappraisal, as we did at the last peer group, you're really talking about managing the threat response. Something untoward is happening, it's generating negative emotions, but by reappraisal and by labeling, you can at least reduce the damage of the threat response. Expectations is more the other way. You're now trying to manage the reward response. And if you're not aware of setting expectations that maybe aren't going to be reality or setting them too high, either for yourself, or think about this for a second, for your direct reports or even your boss, think about the negative consequences of doing that. So when we talk about managing expectations in the workplace, there's really a lot of science behind this as to why you should tread very, very carefully. Now, normally we have some people from pokerstars.net on the call. I'm not sure that we do today or not. And if not, they're probably all gone away for March break. But I thought this would be an interesting example to share with you. So here we are, hypothetically, sitting around a poker table playing poker. And I'm one of the players at the table, and I'm playing with all my friends from pokerstars.net. And basically, the dealer deals out the first couple of cards and bing, guess what? I get a couple of aces. This is really exciting because if anyone plays poker to any extent at all, you'll know the first two cards that you get are aces, are setting you up for a really, really good hand. But before I can do anything, guess what happens? The limbic system kicks in, as we spoke about last month. And before I know it, the brain is getting very, very aroused, but not in the right way. Because what happens is the limbic system takes over from the prefrontal cortex, where all the logic lies. And now one of the possible consequences of my little game of poker, having been dealt two aces to start with, is that I lose the plot because I'm getting so excited and I miss something that's really vital in the game and actually don't win. So when the limbic system gets over aroused and you expect a reward that doesn't transpire, you won't think clearly, and you won't be able to think clearly because a part of the brain called the limbic system is actually taking all the energy of the brain. So this is consistent with what we said, or what we talked about last month. The brain only has a limited amount of energy. It's either going to give it to the prefrontal cortex, where we process, we think, we have our logic, or it's going to go to our emotions, which is the limbic system. And here, in this little example, good old Pete got overexcited and actually missed something critical in the game as a result. So the key points about expectation of positive rewards is that they change your ability to process information. That's really dangerous in and outside work. And how many people actually know this? I certainly didn't before I did the research for this particular peer group. And also the expectation of a positive reward changes what and how you perceive. We'll come on to that a little bit more in a second. But expectations can also create upward and downward spirals in the brain, taking you to the peak of performance or to the depths of despair. So once you have an expectation that isn't met, and you're now going into threat response as opposed to reward response, the brain cannot stop itself. You go down and down and down. And I've got some examples of how this plays out in the workplace in a couple of minutes. So creating the right expectations, although we talk about this all the time, managing expectations, but creating the right expectations is therefore central to maintaining a general feeling of happiness and well-being, managing the emotional script, not only of your daily life, but those of your colleagues at work, rather than to reacting to things as they arise. So experiencing what you expect is now a key part of how the brain works. Think about this for a second. You look at these pictures of chocolate and pancakes and goodies, chocolate dreams, as I've said, in the visual. The way that the brain works, I don't actually have to taste a piece of chocolate for the brain to fire in a way that is consistent with when I do taste the chocolate. Think about that for a second. So it's not the actual reward itself, the physical putting a piece of chocolate in the mouth and tasting it with all the pleasurable things that come with that, but it's the possibility of that that fires the neurons in the brain, that creates the dopamine that says you're about to get a reward. The brain is one step ahead. So when you think about expectations, there are only two ways of looking at it. There are either positive expectations or there are negative expectations. So that in our image there, one individual is expecting the sun to shine. The other one is the one who looks on the dark side. Let's call him Johnny Raincloud, and he's expecting it to rain. The guy on the left will be always processing towards responses because he has positive expectations. So he's looking for primary rewards. The guy on the right is expecting away responses or generating away responses because he's expecting primary threats. It's going to rain, it's not going to sunshine. But here's a really critical point. Your brain automatically orients towards events, people, and information that connects to what you value positively. In other words, what you value positively is going to influence how your brain works. And if you don't value something positively, it will steer naturally away from it. So expectations alter perception, leading people to see what they expect to see and not what they are not expecting to see. And that sounds really crazy, but it will become more clear in a second. So now we're going to talk about expectations and the placebo effect. At the University of Florida, there's this wonderful fella, or there was a wonderful fella by the name of Professor Robert Coghill. And he decided to go out and find 100 people who would be prepared to sit down with him on a regular basis and have a pad fitted to their knee that would generate heat at 50 degrees Celsius, which, as you probably know, would be extremely painful because 50 degrees Celsius is very, very hot. You imagine being the person going out and saying, bumping into people on the street and saying, hey, would you like to participate in a scientific experiment in which I actually put you through pain and agony by generating 50 Celsius of heat on a knee pad that I'm expecting you to wear for at least 10 minutes? Well, funnily enough, he actually did find 100 people, and this is what happened. They were in absolute agony. And nobody should be surprised by that. The expectation was, you're going to put that kind of heat through my knee, which is a sensitive part of the body in the first place. We're going to feel some real pain. So being the sporting chap that he was, Professor Coghill said, oh, you know what? Maybe 50 degrees Celsius was a bit too much. Here's what I'm going to do. I'll turn it down and we'll see if you can stand 45 degrees. Let's see how that goes. Everybody still in? Yes, please, Professor Coghill. Off we go. But very naughtily, he set the knee pad at 50 degrees Celsius again. But what happened was 90% of those 100 people actually said, yes, now you've gone down to 45 degrees, there's not so much pain. The only way that that can work is that the expectation of feeling less pain at a lower temperature became the reality of the individuals concerned. There is no other explanation for it. And that's what we mean effectively by the placebo effect. Placebo effect is you give somebody a candy or something that isn't medical, tell them it's medicine and see if they feel better. That's called the placebo effect. But there is scientific research that has been done that says even when you effectively lie to people and tell them, in this case, we've reduced the temperature, you're going to feel less pain, they feel less pain, even though nothing changed. So back to this particular slide again, and I'll repeat it. Your brain automatically orients towards events, people, and information that connects to what you have valued positively. Pete, I'm going to give you less pain in the next episode of the knee pad. Oh, great, I'm not going to feel so much pain. Expectations alter perception, leading people to see what they expect to see or to feel what they expect to feel and not to see what they're not expecting to feel. So It sounds a little bit complicated, but hopefully you can appreciate that there is scientific evidence that this is really true. There really is a placebo effect, and it's all based on expectations. So if you expect something good or bad, and it impacts the activation of brain regions the same as the actual experience would when generated in reality. That's what he proved. Wow. Think how positive that could be in the workplace, armed with this information and this knowledge. But now we have to talk about underpromising. This is Wolfram Schultz of the University of Cambridge. And I do have a question for you regarding Professor Schultz. Would you buy a used car from this man? Kelly, would you buy a used car from this man?
Sure, by the looks of him. Yeah.
By the looks of him. Why do you say that?
Just looking at him, he looks like he would be knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm making assumptions here, obviously. He looks like he would be knowledgeable. He looks like he would be kind. He does not look like he would, be kind of the smarmy used car salesman.
All righty. So on the one hand, you have an expectation of used car salesmen that they are smarmy. You also have an expectation that this guy, somehow there's something about his physical appearance in this photo that makes you believe that your expectation would be, if you met him, that he would be trustworthy and honest, and that you might even end up buying a used car from him. Is that correct?
That would be correct. You know what? He has even kind of that grandfatherly look. So you would think, okay, he would take care of you and be able to help you out and help you understand the whole process.
What if I were to say to you that Professor Schultz was actually incarcerated for fraud on 3 separate occasions?
Oh, I could believe you, because I liken this to, no, I liken it to like the Paul Bernardo situation, which they did a study with kids and put his picture up with undercover police, and they said, who would you go to in a situation? And he's the one. Yeah.
He's never been incarcerated. You see how I just led your expectations? He's never done anything wrong. All he's ever done is done some research on underpromising, and it's really good research. This reminds me actually of an experiment in my own university days, when a member of the political science group actually came to me and showed me 3 photographs. One was of an older gentleman, not dissimilar to Wolfram Schultz. One was a younger person dressed in jeans. And I can't remember what the third person was. I think it was a lady with a couple of young kids or something like that. And the question that was posed to me was, Pete, which of these 3 people would be most likely to vote Conservative? And I said, I have no clue. They said, but you must. I said, no. But you must. No, not at all. I can't tell by looking at those 3 photos who's more likely to vote Conservative. But what they were looking for in that particular experiment was that I would look at the older gentleman and say, he's more likely to vote for the Conservative Party than the 2 younger people, because that would be my expectation of a Conservative voter. Didn't matter that I ruined their experiment by saying I couldn't decide, but that was what they were hoping that I would actually say. So this is the same thing. The minute you see something, you make assumptions, you have expectations. That's the key point. So he found from his research that when a cue from the environment indicates that you're going to get a reward, good old dopamine is released in response. Do you remember that from a couple of sessions ago? Dopamine's a good thing. But when you expect, when the environment indicates that there's some sort of reward on the horizon for you, dopamine is going to be released as a result. Remember, dopamine is the happy desire chemical, or the neurotransmitter. So, unexpected rewards release more dopamine than expected rewards, and it generates a greater toward response. So think about this for a second. A surprise bonus at work can release more dopamine than an expected pay rise. Think about that again for a second. An unexpected reward will release more dopamine than an expected reward. I gave out some gift cards yesterday to some members of our staff who participated in our Discovery Day that they had no idea was coming. In theory, that would have generated more release of dopamine for those individuals than if they'd have expected me to do something for them at the end of the day. It's the same the other way around, but the effects can be devastating in the workplace. If you are expecting a reward and you don't get it, the dopamine levels will fall steeply, and it's not a pleasant experience. So imagine the away response when you expect a pay rise, which is a toward response initially, and you're suddenly told you're not getting it. Now you've gone from toward to away in the way of response, and you go into a funk that could potentially last for days. So when you see people in the workplace, your colleagues, when they're not themselves, when they've gone quiet, when they seem sulky or agitated or something's up, it may well be, you might not necessarily know the reason why, but it may well be that they've had an expectation that wasn't met. But this is really powerful in the workplace. And this is when the expression, you've got to manage your clients' expectations, your staff's expectations, your boss's expectations, your colleagues' expectations, really starts to gel for me. These toward and away responses can really seriously affect what happens in the office or in the workplace, if you like, on a day-to-day basis. So for me, this is information that I really value, because I know now how carefully I need to manage the expectations, or even how powerful an unexpected reward can be for an individual or a group of individuals. So what does this mean? Ladies and gentlemen, this is actually a red letter day for Tech Connects, and I'm so delighted that you've all joined the call today, because we are actually going to answer a question that's been plaguing mankind for at least 2 centuries. And here we are at Tech Connects. We, today, the 16th of March, 2023, we are going to answer the question that has befuddled the experts, because we now know all about expectations. And the question is that we're going to answer, that's kept everybody else guessing for 2 centuries, is this: why did the chicken cross the road? Because it wanted a burst of dopamine, of course. We all want a reward. That's why the chicken crossed the road, because the dopamine levels rise when you want something. Even something as simple as to cross the road will increase the level of dopamine. So now we know the answer. The chicken crossed the road to get a burst of dopamine. Pretty simple. Now we go back to the scenario. Paul's dopamine levels plummeted when his profit expectations were not met. His brain went from a toward to an away state in a devastatingly short period of time. In his reduced dopamine state, the project started to look hopeless. And remember, he'd made commitments and created expectations for himself, for his wife, and for his normal contractors. He started on a downward spiral where a low dopamine level led to an even lower dopamine level, and he was in a funk, and he was frustrated, and he couldn't understand what looked so promising had become so appalling as a prospect. Think about this for a minute. If you reflect for a moment on your direct reports, your managers and bosses, your colleagues, you are probably seeing this in action every single day of the working week, because for every task that we do, we have expectations of ourselves and we have expectations of other people. And our expectations and the expectations of our colleagues might not even be the same. So when people are not themselves in the workplace, there are obviously many different reasons that are possible, but part of it might be that that individual or group of individuals have suffered an away response, or expectations have not been met, or the expectations of rewards that they thought were coming didn't materialize. And this is going on around us all the time, and it will affect your boss too. No one's exempt. So mindfulness is where you're able to practice noticing what your expectations are in any given situation and trying to set expectations a little lower. Because if you set expectations a little lower, you'll create more dopamine if actually the result is better than what you expected. So how do we create the right expectations? Here's an individual who's going to take that plane. And this individual is saying to himself, you know what? I hope I can get an upgrade for this long haul flight. By the way, Kelly, can you still hear?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, because I just got a warning message on my screen that my internet connection was unstable for a second. I just wanted to check.
Yeah, it did a blip, but you came back, so you're good.
Okay, all right. So this individual is saying, I really, really want to get an upgrade for this long haul flight. Before he goes any further, stop, take a step back, think about the possible scenarios that he may or may not be able to achieve. In this event, it's a simple event. It's a bit like a coin toss. He will either get the upgrade or he won't get the upgrade. He knows he wants it, but there are only two possible scenarios. If he sets himself low expectations, what he'll say to himself is, I'll be okay if I don't get the upgrade, aka the reward, or I'll be really thrilled if I do. If he sets too high expectations, what he'll say to himself is, I'll have a terrible flight if I don't get the upgrade, aka the reward, and only quietly happy if I do. See the difference? And how that can affect happiness and self-esteem and well-being in the workplace? So when you take a step back and look at all the possible outcomes in this way, it makes sense to minimize your expectations of positive rewards in most situations. And the only way you can do it is through mindfulness. So think back to Pete and his game of poker with our mates from pokerstars.net. As soon as I got those two aces, the limbic system kicked in and I was a goner. I wasn't thinking anything other than I'm going to win this game. I set my expectations so high that when they weren't met, I went into a funk. I suffered an away response. And that's what this is all about. How do you gauge the appropriate level of expectations for yourself, for your staff and your direct reports, for your boss, even outside of work? So let's have a look at how the first scenario could have played out if Paul had have been armed with the knowledge that he now has. Here he is again, and here he is still super excited about the fact that he's got this potential whiz-bang project that he wants to do, and he's got to quote it in 2 days, and everybody's getting terribly excited. But he actually stops and pauses before he goes any further, because he says to himself, you know what? I know I've only got 2 days to do this quote, but I don't know if I'm in the right frame of mind to do it right now. I'm going to park it. I'm going to do something different. You know what? I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to go to the supermarket. I'm going to buy some milk. I know we were running a bit short, maybe some eggs. And I'm going to think a little bit while I'm walking, but I'm not going to do the quote physically or the spreadsheet straight away. He's reflecting all the time while he's walking to the store, but he's not thinking about the expectations of profit. He's just thinking about, okay, I know I've got to do this. I know I've got to quote within 2 days. Maybe there's a good chance that we could potentially win this project. He also stops and says to himself, Paul, don't get overexcited. You've done this in the past where you've actually expected profit and got really excited and then got frustrated because the numbers didn't come out in the way that you expected. So take some time, think about it, but don't get too excited at this stage. We may not even win the quote. So he pushes aside the urge to get excited about the project. And what he doesn't do, he doesn't write to the contractors in case expectations are not met because he hasn't set any. When he starts to do the spreadsheet, guess what happens? He crunches the numbers and he's still in a loss. Remember the first scenario? Well, in this scenario, he also produces a loss the first time. But this time, Paul takes a step back and says, you know what? It was only the first attempt. I'll go back, I'll rejig it. I'll see what I can do to make this a different kind of project. But while I'm thinking about that, I'm actually going to go to the fridge and get myself a glass of milk. He goes to the fridge and he bumps into his son. His son says to him, what are you up to? He says, trying to do a quote, you know, that we want to engage in this project. I've got to get the quote done in 2 days. Just done my first pass. The profit is not there. I'm not sure. But in talking to his son and being distracted, guess what happens? AKA what we talked about last month. He hit an impasse, but he had an insight. Ooh, wait a second. What if I actually outsource the coding to a cheaper country? I wonder if that's even possible. And from there, he can actually make a success of the project. He's not damaged any of his existing contractors because he never communicated the expectation in the first place. He's not affected the expectations of good old Rose about going on vacation, but he knows that there is a potential route that might allow him to make a profit and maybe win that quote. So this is the summary of expectations today. I realize, as ever, I hit you with a lot of stuff, and we'll always send out the slides at the end of the day. But the key points are really this. Expectations are the experience of the brain paying attention to a possible reward or threat. It always comes down to those two responses in terms of managing your emotions. Expectations alter the data your brain perceives. It's common to fit incoming data into expectations and to ignore data that don't fit. And expectations can change brain functioning. The right dose of expectations can almost be similar to a clinical dose of morphine. Think about that for a second. And expectations activate the dopamine circuitry. Met expectations, exceeded expectations cause a rise in dopamine levels and a reward response. Unmet expectations generate a large drop in dopamine levels and therefore a threat response. So if you're able to practice noticing what your expectations are in a given situation and try setting them a little lower, you might be more inclined to be able to manage your emotions. That's the key point. But that's also something that you can apply to anybody who reports to you, anybody in your team at your peer level, and even your boss. So remember when Scotty used to say in Star Trek, Kirk say, how long do you need to fix the warp engine, Scotty? And Scotty would say 2 months, but I'll do it in 2 days. And then he'd go back to engineering and say, but I could probably do it in 2 hours. That's what he was doing with Kirk, setting the expectation, building him up, but knowing that he could do it even quicker than what he just promised. So just a reminder, Jane will be with you on March the 22nd, next Wednesday, to talk about what motivates you at work, how you manage those expectations today, how we manage expectations that generate either a positive reward response or a dopamine draining negative threat response. Does anybody have any questions or comments about anything that we've talked about today?